I stole hundreds of narcotics from the hospital I worked at. Part 2. That day was the beginning of a decade-long addiction that would take me places that I never dreamt possible. To be clear, it wasn't a dream at all, it was more of a self-imposed nightmare of the worst kind. Once I crossed that line at work and didn't immediately get caught, I thought I can get away with this and no one has to know, as long as I'm careful. So from then on, every morning I'd wake up and my only motivation to go to work was because work was my new drug dealer. Otherwise, I wouldn't have bothered to even show up at all. So I kept this routine up. I'd wear long sleeve shirts under my scrubs every day. Once I got report, I would get my supplies and head to the bathroom to get my 4 in place. This was my daily ritual and became almost an unconscious act. It was just part of my work routine. I kept telling myself I have to do this because if I don't I will be so sick that I'll be useless to anyone. So the lies, stealing, and drug use continued. I eventually changed my schedule to midnight so there were less management, less doctors, and less nurses. This would help ensure my secret would stay hidden. As you can imagine, the months went by and I started exhibiting more and more unusual behavior. I thought I was fooling everyone, but people started to notice. They weren't stupid. I could feel people secretly rolling their eyes when I came up with a new excuse to use the restroom. It'd invent increasingly more ridiculous reasons to run out to my car. In reality, I was using different bathrooms in the hospital to inject my Dilaudid without fear of interruption. On several occasions, in my narcotic haze, I'd fall asleep outside while on my lunch break. This was explained away several times by blaming it on my struggle to adapt to the night shift hours. This entire time I truly felt I was functioning at a normal level and thought nothing of quitting. It was never even an option for me because of the shock wave that would ripple through my life if anyone found out. No one knew. Not my family, not my fiancé, not anyone. A large amount of effort went into keeping it that way. So my train continued roaring down the tracks at an alarming pace until it inevitably derailed completely. My last day of work started like any other. Only this time I had a very specific agenda. I arranged my schedule so that I'd have 5 days off. Which also meant 5 days with no access to what had become my only source for drugs. So my plan was to sign out my normal amount of narcotics but stash away half of them. This way I'd be covered over the next 5 days while I was off. As my shift came to an end, I gave report to the nurse relieving me. Feeling comforted by the fact that I had 7 vials of Dilaudid in my scrub pocket for my upcoming days off. As I was walking out of the unit, my nurse manager was walking toward me. She stopped me and asked if I could follow her to HR to discuss a code I was involved in the previous week. An older woman went into cardiac arrest in a different part of the hospital. As a part of the code team, I went to help. I took turns with another RN doing CPR and pushing cardiac meds to attempt to save her. She didn't make it. Now, my nurse manager was telling me I forgot to chart something about the code. Made sense to me, no alarm bells were going off that it could be something else. The possibility never crossed my mind that I was about to be confronted about my drug use. But I should have. The only unusual thing I noticed was my manager instructed me to leave my code and purse in my locker. I thought to myself, why wouldn't I be bringing my stuff with me if I'm leaving after I quickly explain this code? I shrugged this off and followed her down to the bottom floor of the hospital. We approached the conference room, she opened the door and I immediately realized that this was not about the code. I walked in the room and was met by the head of pharmacy, the district attorney for the county, the head of mental health, and of course next to me was my manager. I sat down and the pharmacist started showing me my narcotics charting over the last year or so. I already knew where this was going but I didn't know where it would end. Each person spoke at length about my suspicious charting. I wish I could tell you what was said, but I can't. I sat there watching their mouths move but their voices were muted. All I could hear was the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. I was picturing my mom and dad's face when they found out I was in jail for stealing drugs from the hospital. I pictured calling my fiancé to tell him I was a complete fraud. I wasn't the intelligent, successful, ambitious woman I had portrayed myself to be. I was a broken, lying, stealing, drug addict who was about to lose everything. I was a shell of the person I'd been pretending to be. Once I brought myself back to the reality of what was happening in the conference room, my first thought was to deny everything. How could they prove any of this? My second thought was, I'd been working so hard to hide this deep dark secret and I'm exhausted. So I took a deep breath, mustered any speck of honesty I had still clinging to a dusty corner of my soul, and told the district attorney everything. I was surprised at how relieved I felt that someone else knew my secret, even if that meant I was now in some serious trouble. I didn't tell him about the 7 vials of Dilaudid in my pocket because why did it matter? I just told him what I did and besides, I'd definitely need 1 or 2 of those when I left. I'd be damned if I'd just willingly give them up. If I ever needed something to escape my reality, it was now. Just as I finalized my decision to keep the 7 vials to myself and not mention it, he told me he needed to search me. Appalled, I refused the search and asked to leave immediately. He explained to me that they needed to make sure I didn't have any hospital-owned property. He also informed me that I wasn't allowed to leave the property without being searched. All I wanted to do was get the hell out of there. I felt defeated in every sense of the word. I slowly emptied the contents of my scrub pockets onto the conference table. He didn't seem surprised at all. It seemed as if this was exactly what he expected to find. He looked at me with a neutral expression, then looked down at the tourniquet, syringes, and vials of Dilaudid. As he picked up the Dilaudid and handed it to the pharmacist, I felt a visceral pain. That was what I had come to count on to keep myself together. It was my best friend. The only thing that I looked forward to each day, and he took it. I secretly cursed him in my head. Why the hell can't you just mind your own business and leave me alone? I'm still showing up for work and doing my job. What does it matter to you if I need something to help me cope every now and then? What does it matter to you? He then patted me down to make sure that I wasn't in possession of anything else. At this point, I thought for sure that I was about to be handcuffed and taken to jail. To my complete surprise, he looked at me and said, "I hope you get the help you need. Here is the number to the Nurse Peer Assistance Program. Call it as soon as you get home and check into a rehab ASAP. I'll be in touch." 2 hospital security guards then walked me up to my locker, searched my coat and purse, and walked me out to my car. I drove away feeling grateful I wasn't going to jail. Sadly, as grateful as I felt to not be in jail, I was also the angriest I'd ever been. That devil on my shoulder named addiction was irate. I had 0 drugs. Nothing to cover up the terrible realization that my life would now be dramatically different. The elaborate mask I spent years constructing was ripped off. I felt like an exposed nerve. I had dug myself into a hole that I wasn't sure I could ever get out of. On top of that, now I have to go to rehab. I can't imagine how things could get any worse. I should just give up now and save myself and everyone else a lot of heartache. Watch for Part 3, my first rehab and complying with the Board of Nursing to save my license.